So the kind of meditation that we practice over here is called vipassana, insight meditation. And vipassana means seeing things clearly, seeing things as they really are. And when we start looking at seeing things as they really are, and the kind of meditation that we practice, it can help us at several different levels, right? So at the most basic level, it can help us reduce our stress. And this is a clinically validated form of reducing your stress, right? So they've done clinical studies and they say mindfulness and meditation can reduce stress. So if that's what you're after, this is a very helpful practice. One level above that, this can be very helpful for regulating your emotional responses. So, and if that's something that could benefit you and that's been benefiting you, it works there too. And then potentially at a third level, it helps you figure out who you truly are. So we're going to be talking a little bit today about who you really are. Who am I? Who am I? And to do that, we're going to talk about a concept in Buddhism that's called anatta. Anatta. And like most Buddhist things, this comes in a sequence of three. It's a list, right? As part of a list. There's a list called the 3 characteristics of existence. And this is interesting because, most of us come from a tradition where we believe that there is a soul that is eternal and it is happy after our death. I grew up in the Hindu philosophy. Many of you have probably grown up in the Judeo-Christian philosophy. And this kind of a philosophy of saying there is this soul which is eternal and there's happiness that's eternal is a fairly common kind of thought process and philosophy. Now, the Buddha, 2,600 years ago, said something a little radical. And you could argue that it's radical today too. He said, there is no soul or self. What there is mainly conditioning and biology, and that is impermanent, that is unstable. So in Pali, which was the language of the Buddha 2,600 years ago, he said these words. He said, Sabbe Sankara Anicca. That means all conditioning is impermanent. That was the first mark of existence. The second characteristic of existence he spoke about was, he said, Sabbe Sankara Dukkha. All conditioning is unstable, unsatisfactory. And then the third mark of existence he spoke about was, he said in Pali, Sabbe Dhamma anatta. In all of the mental formations and phenomena that we have seen, there is no self, there is no soul. That's pretty radical, right? It's radical today. Let's try to unpack that. And the first thing that perhaps comes up when you say this is when you say, who am I? And you say there is no soul. It's a scary thought. But what we'll see is that it's actually a very hopeful thought. It's something that actually connects all of us together. So let's unpack this word anatta. And some of you folks know that I'm a bit of a word geek. I love etymology. And so I take Pali words, which was the words of the Buddha, and I go back to Sanskrit, right? So Sanskrit was the classical language at that time, like Latin. And the nice thing about Sanskrit is that there's a dictionary where you can just go look up the meaning of the word. With Pali, oftentimes you look at religious interpretations. With Sanskrit, there's of course interpretations, but you're going to look at the meaning of the word. So in Sanskrit, anatta becomes anatman, anatman. And it's a compound word, just like German words, you have a lot of compound words, you have Sanskrit words being compound words. And it's made up of two words, na, not, atman, atman. Na, atman, anatman. Well, what does this word atman mean? Interestingly, Sanskrit is actually a group of languages which a lot of Indo-European languages is what it's called, right? So you have some European languages which also have a similar root. And a similar root in German is Atem, breath, the essence of your body. The essence of your body. Atman in Sanskrit means soul. It's the essence of your body, soul. And in Hindu philosophy, there's a lot of conversation about the soul and then what's beyond the soul. So there's philosophies in Hinduism, like if there's Atman, is there a separate Paramatma, beyond Atma, called the Brahman? And there's all these conversations that go on, talk about, is Atma and Paramatma, or Atman and Brahman the same or different? There's a school of thought that says they're different. That's called duality. There's some people who say it's the same. That's called non-dual philosophy. So some of you might have heard those words, non-dual philosophy. It's called Dvaita 2, Advaita 1. But the Buddha went a little bit further. He said, what if the conversation was not about Atma and Paramatma, or Atma and Brahma being one or two? What if there was no Atma at all? What if that were true? This is a very counterintuitive conversation, right? Because it's hard for us to think about that. We all got up today, we got dressed, came here, we are here. We just did a mindful meditation about the body. The body is here. How can I not be here? So instead of having a philosophical conversation about this, let's see if we can kind of slide into this instead of staring at the sun and having this, are we here? Are we not here? Who am I? Let's see if we can kind of get some examples about this and talk about how perhaps this could be true. We'll actually start with how we did our meditation this morning, right? So we went in, we scanned the body. The body breathes by itself. The body breathes by itself. Are folks convinced the body breathes by itself? Is there some conviction about that? Yeah, the body breathes by itself. And when you came down to your chest, you could feel that breath. You could feel the heart beating by itself. You could feel body sensations, this little portion of your body, or scan from the top of the head down to your toes. You were feeling these body sensations. And these were arising and passing away, and arising and passing away. And they were doing this by themselves. So there's perhaps a little bit of this inkling like, perhaps there could be a no self or no soul, and we're still going to be okay. Incidentally, a lot of times I think we use the word self and ego sometimes interchangeably, and I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, so this is my understanding about it. The ego is actually very important. It's a way of regulating your attention, what you pay attention to, right? So the ego is very important. The self and identifying with that self is perhaps not necessary. That's the interesting portion that we're going to be playing around with today. So we had a little glimpse of that when we did our meditation. But how does that translate itself in real life? And because this is so counterintuitive, sometimes the way this becomes apparent is somewhat dramatic. I take my own personal example. And this was, I would say, probably in the early 2000s, probably around 2000. So, gosh, 26 years ago now, a long time ago. And this was when I was climbing Mount Hood with a group of people. And, you know, some of you folks on Zoom may not be around the Portland area. So Mount Hood is Portland's mountain, right? So it's part of the Cascades, about 11,500 feet high, snow-capped, glaciers, beautiful mountain. And this was when I was still beginning to get into this whole wilderness and hiking and climbing. I'd moved from India about, 4 years ago, and I'd never seen snow before. So climbing Mount Hood was something that was definitely out of my experience. We start off at Timberline Lodge. I think that's about 6,000 feet, 5,000 feet, I forget now. And normally what you do is you start climbing in the middle of the night because this is a crumbly mountain. All of our mountains, the Cascade Mountains, are all crumbly volcanic mountains. And you want to be off the mountain before the sun starts hitting the snow fields. Otherwise, you're going to start having crumbly rock coming down and falling on you. You don't want that. So we start climbing at midnight. Forget how many people we were, about a dozen or so. And we had our crampons and ice axes. We were prepared. It was around the May time frame. And this was such an otherworldly experience for Vik, right? And we were climbing steep snow, and you're doing your rest step, right? So it gets steep enough where you take a step and you've got all your weight on your back foot, and you relax your front foot for just a little second, and then you switch. You're also breaking trail from the deep snow. So there's a meditation there, right? Just like you're aware of your breath, you're doing walking meditation. You're doing walking meditation on this steep snow slope. And many of you have been on Mount Hood. You know it's an active volcano. You can smell sulfur from the fumaroles. You can see fumaroles coming out. This was blowing Vik's mind. What are you doing here? Steep snow, a breaking trail, there's fumaroles. And then there were these amazing snow formations that looked like dragon's backs. So there's step, there's step, there's step, there's step. At a certain point, Vik stopped existing. There was only the mountain. There was only the experience of the mountain. And I don't know how long this happened. Time did not exist. There was only the experience. This was very scary for me at that time. I thought, oh my God, have I fallen asleep I'm going to fall down the mountain. I didn't know what that was. I believe that was an experience of anatta, the not self. And as I say this, this is not a miracle. This is not some grand thing that happens. All of you have experienced this. This is a very natural experience. It just needs you to get out of the way of yourself. And that's what happened when I was climbing. Like, what am I doing here? It was just so otherworldly that I got out of my own way. You have all gotten out of your own ways sometimes, and you all have experienced this. You may not have experienced, you may not remember it, but you have experienced it. Now, this is a little bit different from what I call as good as it gets moments, right? When everything's going well, things are in flow. That's a very nice feeling. This is a little bit different. This is that not self experience where Vik ceased to exist and there was only the experience. Once you had this experience and you're aware of it, you may actually become aware and remember other experiences that you've had. I was reminded of when I was a child and we were living in a multi-generational family back in India. And I remember, I forget how old I was. There was these rays of sunlight coming in from the window, little dust particles in there. And all of a sudden, Vik ceased to exist, and there was only the sun rays and the dust. It happens all of a sudden. And it kind of gives you the sense of this anatta. So you start getting more of an inkling of what's happening there. I find that there are other nature experiences which also give you this little feeling and inkling of what anatta might be. After those times climbing Mount Hood, I love the outdoors. I didn't grow up with the wilderness like we have here in Oregon, so it's a big part of who I am is to go out in the wilderness. And oftentimes, when you're walking in the wilderness, you're able to, once again, get out of your way. And when you do that, when I have done that in the past, there is just the body moving. In Buddhism, we talk about the 5 senses, and here we're talking about the body as one of its senses, but there is a sense called proprioception, which just means that you're aware of where you are in space. So that's a sense. You can be aware of proprioception when you're walking. And when you're in the woods, a lot of these other things start disappearing in there, and you're able to start being aware of proprioception, the body moving. This is the body moving. It moves by itself. There is no need for the soul and the self. It becomes very clear. It's something that you just understand experientially. Now, once you start analyzing that, your rational mind says, hang on, how does that even work? Right? So we make up stories. So when I was up in the mountain, I made up the story of I was falling asleep. Oh my God, I'm scary. When I was coming down the mountain and I was aware of proprioception in the woods with these big trees in the wilderness, once again, there was a sense of not self, but little piece said, hang on, something's wrong. And that something wrong made up a little driver in my head that was driving my body. Because my self did not like the non-self. It wanted to make up a self. It said, well, it's moving because there's a little driver in your head. Can't you see it? We start making up these things. But the body moves by itself. The body moves by itself. And hopefully that's awakening some of that within all of you. You've all experienced that. You've all experienced that. So let's start talking about what does neuroscience say about this? Have many of you heard of Jill Bolte Taylor? Yes, you all have. So she's a neuroscientist, and she has an amazing video clip on YouTube. It's a TED Talk, 20 minutes. It's called Stroke of Insight. Stroke of Insight. And a neuroscientist had a stroke, and she observed what was happening in there. It's the most fascinating talk that I've found, and it's a wonderful Dharma talk all by itself. Please watch him. We were going to try and put that up, but it was just too complicated to do all the audio video sharing in here. But one of the things she says with a lot of professional credibility, she actually brings out a brain on stage and says, here's the left brain, here's the right brain. And she says, the left brain is a serial processor. It processes things one after another, one after another. She says the right brain is a parallel processor. It processes all at once. They're connected by the corpus callosum, but they're effectively two different things. We spend a lot of time in our left hemisphere processing things serially, one after another, one after another. The right brain processes all at once, parallel. When Jill Bolte Taylor had a stroke, her stroke affected the left portion of her brain. And when she lost the use of the left hemisphere, she found that all she had was the right hemisphere. And she describes this in wonderful detail. She started losing balance in her bathtub. She held on to it. But when she looked at her arm, she was not able to tell the difference between where her body ended and the rest of the universe started. There was no differentiation between her and the universe. She did not feel constrained by her body. She knew that she was an energy being connected to everything else in the universe. And in this moment, she says she was perfect and she was whole. And that's what we are. In this moment, we are perfect and we are whole. Now, when the left brain comes in, it says, no, you're not. You got to worry about what happened yesterday. You got to worry about what happens tomorrow. But it's that calculating ability that the left brain gives us that is able to say, all right, let's manipulate things. But we are able to tap into that parallel processing, if you will, and know that we are fully connected to everything else in the universe. So when the Buddha says there is no soul, the invitation that we have is we don't have to be a single drop of water. We have to put so much energy into keeping that little drop of water as its own separate entity. We are not the drop of water because we are the ocean. We are the ocean. So why do we have to worry about having this individual soul when we're just part of this amazing pool of energy that is the universe? So the Buddha said, everywhere you see, all the mental phenomena that you see, there is no soul, no self. Now, what are some of the things that we start doing from a left brain standpoint, right? So what are some of the stories that we tell ourselves that reinforce our separateness, our desire to be a individual drop of water? Language is a huge portion of that, right? So think about how we say, I am angry. I am angry. Yeah. So you have identified yourself as a being that is angry. Now, I grew up speaking a language called Kannada in the southwestern part of India, Kannada. And I actually put this up in Google Translate. And when we talk about, when you say, I am angry, have that come out in Kannada, and I translate it back, it says, anger has come to me. Nanage kopa bandide. Nanage kopa bandide. Anger has come to me. Try that next time. Are you angry? Or has anger come to you? Are you sad? Or has sadness come to you? Are you happy? Or has happiness come to you? Try that out and see if that changes something within you, if that shifts something. And this has to be an experiential thing, right? So when you start trying to think with your left brain, it's almost impossible to do that about the right brain. So it has to be something that's experienced. You cannot reason your way into anatta. You have to experience it. But having said that you cannot reason your way into anatta, let's try to see if we can. Do we want to try doing a screen share? Let's bring up this slide. So we're going to come up with another Buddhist list. And this is something, once again, I'll use the Pali word, we'll come back to this. It's called pratitya samutpada, dependent origination, dependent origination. A lot of words in here. You may be able to read it, you may not be able to read it. The other thing about a lot of these philosophies, if you will, is that, I believe that the Buddha started with a smaller list and then people added more things to it. It became a 12-step process as opposed to something that was smaller when the Buddha first came up with it. And the first sutta that it gave out was that the Wheel Sutra. But he says things arise from things that have happened before. Or when one thing happens, it gives rise to something else. It starts with the body. It starts with the body. We just spent some time reflecting on the body. We have a body. I think we're pretty convinced that we have a body. It's called Namarupa. The name and the form, Namarupa. This body has 6 senses, 6 sense organs, right? It's actually more than that, there's probably 37, but let's call that 6. And there are sensations that come in contact with our sense organs. We practiced that in meditation. We became aware of the breath. We became aware of body sensations. Sensations come in contact with sense organs. It's called contact. So there was a very specific step of contact called phassa in Pali. After contact, because of our conditioning, there is liking, disliking, pleasant, unpleasant that arises for us automatically. So we may have felt some sensations when we came in contact with sensations. Maybe we had pain on the shoulder or on the knee. Maybe that felt unpleasant. Maybe there was some disliking that happened. You may have heard the sounds of the birds chirping outside, thinking it's already spring. And that might have been a happy sound, pleasant. So there's pleasant, it's called Vedana, feeling tone. After that pleasant, there is craving or aversion. Pleasant things we want. Unpleasant things don't want. These things are happening on a moment by moment basis. Every single input that comes in, every single sense that your sense organ is able to come in contact with. This is happening all the time. After craving comes clinging. Clinging. I want this. I want this. And then after that, the Buddha says there's something called bhavana, there's becoming. You identify. So there's this sound. You like the sound. You know, there's the bird chirping. I like the sound. I want to hold on to it. I'm clinging to it. And I've become the person who wants the birds to do more of that, or like, oh my God, global warming. I'm scared. Spring shouldn't be this early. I become the person who doesn't want this. Becoming, identification. And identification is this process that you can unfold. Now, after you identify, there's a story that I start telling her. Oh my God, global warming. It's getting so warm. Oh no, I want to go on a walk. I've identified, I tell the story. I'm outside right now. I've gone way beyond. So this is where it talks about the birth of the story. It lives itself, it conditions itself, and then creates conditioning that then creates a wheel again and again and again. So in this insight practice that we just did, what we're doing is coming into careful attention. We're paying careful attention to sensations, to liking and disliking, craving. It turns out, if you're able to catch this chain of dependencies and origination, you can stop the identification. You can stop conditioning from happening, going into stories. And that is the way to start trying to have a rational mind try to understand this, have the left brain start trying to think about this. So what it really comes down to is you can understand who you are through experience, through meditation, by getting out of your own way. And what you are is in this moment, whole and perfect. Let's just pause there and sit with that. The seeing is the doing. The seeing is the doing.